Good evening. I'm Linda Farb, the chair of the Coalition Against Global Genocide, and I'm very glad to welcome you to our final discussion on what if democracy fails on today, the Human Rights Day. I'm grateful for your support for our all-volunteer organization, and I'm happy to introduce one of our board members, Dr. Alfonso Porter. He will be our host for this discussion, and his experience is broad. He's had many years in the education division of and also in journalism. He's written for the Washington Post and the Examiner. He's worked as a public school teacher and administrator. Porter is currently professor in the Department of Journalism and Technical Communications at Metropolitan State University in Denver, and he serves as the editor of the Denver Urban Spectrum. COAGG is glad to have Alfonso as a board member and as the great moderator of our series this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Linda. First, before we get started, I'd like to say good evening to everyone. And again, thank you so much for joining us for this very, very important discussion. I think that it will be engaging for us, particularly because it is relevant today. First, I'd like to thank the Coalition for continuing these outstanding programs that are designed to educate and inspire and motivate. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Denver Urban Spectrum and Jewish Colorado. The mission of COAG is to educate, motivate, and inspire individuals and communities to oppose genocide and crimes against humanity. In 2018, we had a roundtable discussion with leaders from the African American community that focused on awareness, prevention, reconciliation, and reparations. 2019 saw us remembering and honoring 1619 to 2019, recognizing the 400th anniversary of slavery in North America, with an outstanding screening of Slavery and the Making of America by two-time Emmy Award-winning filmmaker Dante James, followed by a panel discussion on how do we proceed today to reach the ideals of equality, respect, and freedom. Originally, these two events were to be followed with a 2020 conference to continue these discussions, but due to our new COVID landscape, we decided to host 4 community forums, discussions, with the overall theme of what if democracy fails. Tonight's topic is the psychology of upstanders, bystanders, perpetrators, and witnesses. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I think we have a group second to none, and I think that they will bring forth information for us that will leave us better informed when we finish this program. Barbara Coloroso is an international best-selling author and educator for the past 49 years, an internationally recognized speaker and consultant on parenting, teaching, school discipline, positive school climate, bullying, grieving, nonviolent conflict resolution, and restorative justice. She is the author of 6 international bestsellers, including the latest edition of The Bully, The Bullied, and The Not So Innocent Bystander, and Extraordinary Evil, A Brief History of Genocide and Why It Matters. She has appeared on CBC, CTV, BBC, Oprah Winfrey Show, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, and NPR, and has been featured in the New York Times, Time Magazine, U.S. News and World Report, Newsweek, and other national and international publications. Barbara is a board member with us here at the Coalition Against Genocides. Dr. Jim Wilder, and we're pleased to introduce him. He is a clinical psychologist, author, international speaker who develops ways to apply brain science to sustain a joyful life, create hopeful girls, and restore communities. Wilder looks at the reality before and after human atrocities. He has trained leaders and counselors on 5 continents. Wilder grew up in the Andes Mountains and has traveled for 30 years, both learning and teaching resilience in places like Southern Sudan, India, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Eastern Europe, Mexico, Korea, Thailand, Chile, Brazil, and Canada. Wilder is the thinker behind the Life Model, a lifespan guide to being fully human. He is the author of 17 books and numerous articles, now in 13 languages. It's phenomenal. Focused on maturity and relational skills. And finally, ladies and gentlemen, we have Ms. Karen Brass. She shares the lessons of the Holocaust and narrated through her eyes as the child of a Holocaust survivor. Brass maintains that no child should ever stand silent in the face of hatred. The daughter of David Zotter, a Holocaust survivor, the detainee in a Krakow Poland ghetto and 4 concentration camps, one being the Auschwitz death camp. Brass provides her father's personal accounts of the atrocities that befell his family and other victims of the Holocaust, and how so many people just stood by and did or said nothing. Throughout her 38 years of worldwide professional speaking engagements, she has noted the atrocities inflicted upon the millions of innocent children, women and men, and weaves into her words what it means to be the quiet bystander who watches as horrific, demeaning, unconscionable events unfold before them. And then she informs on how each of us can instead be an anti-bully stand-upster who resolutely acts to decisively eliminate discrimination, hatred, and cruelty. Today, Brass promotes stand-upsters and their inherent ability to nullify bullying in today's schools and work environments, as well as in other community sectors. Her website, www.standupsters.com, provides information and tools for teachers, parents, students, and communities to fight against hatred of others and how inclusion must become the new normal. Additionally, Brass has organized, facilitated, and met regularly with the Children of Holocaust Survivors since 1995, where she currently is an executive board member for this international conference. She serves on many speakers bureaus across Colorado. She is also on the board with us at the Coalition Against Genocide. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to welcome our phenomenal speakers and presenters tonight. All right, so before we start, I have a basic introduction that'll get us started, and then we will move from there. So tonight, we will be taking a deeper dive into the psychology of those who, while witnessing atrocities, make conscious decisions to act or remain silent. While some stand up, what makes some stand up while others either comply, observe, or worse, participate? Are these behaviors more individualistic, or are they a result of a follower mentality? Is this what we are seeing in the United States today? For example, during the George Floyd protests, the whole world marched in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. What drove this upstander behavior on behalf of white, Asian, Middle Eastern, Jewish, and Latinx populations around the globe? Yet, as spirited as the upstanders marched, so did those who supported the perpetrator. We will take a deeper look into the vicious cycle of genocide by drilling down on how these behaviors, for example, the bully, who serves as the planner and instigator, the henchman, the bully's right-hand man who does the bully's bidding, the active supporters. These folks cheer the bully on in hopes of reaping some reward. The passive supporter feels pleasure from the pain of the targeted group. The disengaged onlooker who believes it's none of my business anyway. And the witness oppose the bully, but feel the need to help, but finds an excuse to remain uninvolved. We're literally witnessing all of these behaviors unfold in real time. I'm sorry, excuse me. I lost my notes. Sorry about that. Okay. Bear with me, folks, please. Thank you. We have a president who has unmasked behaviors and attitudes that most of us assumed had been overcome. He spreads misinformation broadly in just about every area, whether it is about a deadly virus that is killing thousands of our fellow citizens every day, and we stand by. He is undermining a national election seeking to delegitimize our democracy, and we're bystanders. He brazenly encourages racism, sexism, and xenophobia, leading to death threats against not only minorities and women and those who are foreign-born, but against honorable lawmakers just doing their jobs. And yet we are bystanders. We watch as armed mobs descend on the homes of our fellow citizens. We are watching as he usurps the law at will by calling lawmakers and bullying them into breaking the law. And many follow, and we're bystanders. We watch as plots are hatched to kidnap and murder a sitting governor, and we are disengaged onlookers. We are witnessing our democracy being pulled apart brick by brick to the point of near collapse. We've watched as once trusted legislators who perform with integrity abandon their oaths of office and become active supporters of the madness. A good friend once told me that the Holocaust did not begin with gas chambers. It happened gradually as a result of the behaviors that I've outlined here today. While we can take at least some comfort that there will be a change in leadership, there is still 6 weeks remaining for this mania to continue to unfold under a threat of a scorched earth mentality that because the country betrayed me, I will burn it all down before I leave. Let's stand up and not allow any more. Our experts tonight will help us better understand why we behave as we do, and perhaps provide us with some tools as we move forward. So ladies and gentlemen, that's our opening statement. And I would like to just throw it open to our panel. So I won't necessarily call on anyone, but my first question is, why in the face of what we know to be an atrocity, do we not respond? And I'll throw that open to the panel. Barbara, would you like to jump in on there?
I'd be happy to. One of the things we need to understand is that it is truly a short walk from hateful rhetoric to hate-fueled crimes to crimes against humanity. Genocide was not an unimaginable horror. It was thoroughly imagined, meticulously planned, horrifically carried out by people who decided that a group of people were less than them and often less than human. And we have to recognize where we're coming from and what is our role. You mentioned the different characters, the bully, and the not so innocent bystanders, but there is a fourth character, the witness, resistor, and defender. Somebody who's brave-hearted. I know Karen calls them stand-upsters and others call them upstanders. I just call them brave-hearted. Witnesses, resistors, and defenders. And the witness either records it and spreads the word about it, or takes pictures, or somehow captures the moment. For instance, with George Floyd, filming that, capturing the moments, the 8-9 minutes of the death of a human being. They were a witness. Resistors confront those who are doing the mean and cruel acts at cost to themselves. But a greater cost is to be the defender of those who have been targeted, to stand up, speak out, step in, do the right thing when the burden is heavy. And I think before we get global, and in my work, I talk about bullying and then that short walk, we have to understand how that could ever happen. I talk about Martin Buber's I and thou. He says, I am unique and you're unique. And we have a common humanity. That's the we, that we are interdependent, interrelated, and interconnected. But when we commit a crime against another human being, or even starting with the bullying, which is about contempt for another human being, and genocide is wrapped in contempt, then what we see here is I'm an I, but you're an it. The Nazis called Jews vermin and bacteria eating at the fabric of our society. Armenians were called dogs. Cambodians were called worms. Rohingya are called fleas. That's that dehumanization. You have to dehumanize in order for you to be able to grab a baby out of a mother's arms, to put a child in a cage. You have to first dehumanize them and get that trap of comradeship, that group of people to go along with you. And once you've done that, you can do anything and not feel shame or compassion because they're not humans in your eyes. And so it's that whole issue of contempt for another human being that is very different and something I have had to fight against. We so often use conflict resolution tools to resolve actions that were contempt for another human being, hateful actions, demeaning actions. They are very different. Conflicts you resolve, but mean and cruel you stop in its tracks. And so to use conflict resolution is to say that both parties are equal. And when a group of people are attacked, are targeted in crimes against humanity, there's no equality there. And so we can't rely on peacekeeping tools. We must rely on stopping it in its tracks and holding people accountable. And then if we can go beyond that to help heal the community.
Thank you very much, Barbara. You've given us a lot to think about. I'd like to turn that same question over to Dr. Wilder. Dr. Wilder, why is it that we bear witness to such horrors, but we're not moved to action?
Well, I'm going to take a little bit different approach here than what we just heard from Barbara, because she approached it from the observable side. And there's a lot of processes that go on in the brain that happen faster than we can observe that set this whole thing up. So the two sides aren't incompatible. But how does the brain actually produce an intervention or passivity or active support for some kind of an aggression? We know that chimps carry out genocide on other chimps. So the process or the capacity for wiping out an entire population of similar beings is pretty deeply wired in the brain. And so one of the ways we often do that is we study correlates of what is the brain doing or where is it active at the time that something goes wrong. But there's a problem with correlates, and that's if we correlate shark attacks with what people are wearing, for instance, we would come to the conclusion that swimsuits by and large cause shark attacks, which is an incorrect conclusion right there. Because what the brain does very well, it does without thinking about it a lot. It's sort of pre-wired to do some kinds of things. And actually, it seems as though the things that allow both perpetrators and bystanders to do what they do is a lack of brain activity. And specifically, what's missing is the ability or the desire or the active sharing of the pain of another person. See, if we share the pain of another being, even if it's a horse or some other animal, we can't continue to let something happen. So the question is, how does the brain either not activate or block the sharing of another person's pain? And in fact, torturers work very hard to make sure they don't share the pain, but they study the pain very carefully, because part of doing all this is you want to produce pain in others. So you're very aware of producing it. You're just not going to share it at all. And there are multiple causes, brain states, that produce the same pattern that we observe in perpetrators, bystanders, and upstanders. So if you'll indulge me in a little tiny little brain lecture here, there's some sequences in the brain, and on the right side of the brain, we have the fast track in the brain. It goes faster than conscious thought. A lot of things get set up on this fast track before we even notice them as patterns over on the slow track. And I'll break this down for us a little bit right here. On this part of the brain over here, the first thing that the brain is noticing, wait, stuff that starts in the back and moves around this way in the brain. So just to get the flow of things on the right side of the brain. The brain noticed something, someone is looking at me. And that is something that predators do. And it's also something that members of my species do. So the brain has to very quickly in here sort out, am I looking at a predator or a member of my species? We go a little bit farther up here, and the brain wants to know, is this a member of my group? So is this, do we share a group identity, not just species identity, but this is really the first line of defense when it comes to avoiding genocide. And that is looking at other human beings as not just members of our species, but somehow members of the group of people that I protect or care about. And what makes your brain decide that is, do we share food? This is how the monkeys and almost every other species decides who's part of my group, is when we've got food, do we share it with each other? Do we share personal spaces just a little bit farther along this sequence? And then do we share feelings is up here towards a very large section of that. And then right up here at the front, do we share pain? Is very important. And what happens when torturing and other stuff is going on, this part is dead. It's off. It's not getting a signal that says we share pain. But then you get farther than that. The next question is, what is it like my group to do now? And that's the second line of defense. That's what we're hearing a lot about. Does my group speak up when we see something going wrong and someone being hurt? Now, if we don't share pain, we don't even get this far. But if we do share the pain, we get it this far, then we have to say, what is it that we're going to do about this? We've got a known response to this kind of situation right here. We can't let it go on. But that can be blocked right down here by saying, this isn't personal to me. So before the process even starts, if we don't feel it's personal, it never gets through the rest of the process. So you'll notice a lot of this has to do with trying to make sure your brain thinks something isn't personal to you. Next, it goes up to, is it good, bad, or frightening? And if it's personal to me and it's good, bad, or frightening, I've got a special event kind of response for that. But if it's not personal to me, then I don't care. Then the next part up here in the shared feelings, is this too intense or complicated, like humiliation, contempt, and dread? Three things that you will always see perpetrators producing. Because that makes it so intense that many people's brains shut down at that point. And because their brain goes into a cramp, like I can't handle this, the shared pain part just ahead of that doesn't get the signal. So now I'm just so upset about myself and what might happen to me that I stop thinking about sharing the pain of anybody else. And then finally, the way down in the bottom of the brain, it's doing the cost-benefit ratio kind of a decision, like what is the cost versus the benefit to me? Now, if we get up to my people's response, what do my people do about this? At that point, the brain, after you're 12 years of age, decides that the survival of my people is more important than my own. So if we see others as my people in some important way, then the cost-benefit ratio is very different. My people must go on being the kind of people they are, whether I make it or not. And at that point, I'm willing to do what really matters. Now, the problem is you can do that without caring for somebody, and my people and their survival will also fuel the perpetrator side. So what happens when we don't get into this shared pain, the brain doesn't share pain, it goes into enemy mode. It doesn't share pain. It senses a threat, however small or imagined, and it reacts at that point like, you're not one of my people. And now it begins to manifest this enemy mode. The switch to enemy mode happens over in the brain's fast track before we're even conscious of it. And it comes out in kind of three ways. And with this, I'll sort of end. The first one is simple enemy mode. We failed to make a human connection. And as we never noticed that you were there and I never happened to care about you. The second is what I call stupid enemy mode. And that's when we do something that's really stupid. We get so mad, we tear up somebody that we care about. You know, it can be people we have relationships to, it can be our neighbor. Sorry about this, Karen, but there's expression now about going Karen.
I know.
Yeah, that's getting stupid into stupid enemy mode right there. And in Father Ubald from Rwanda, he tells a story of a fellow named Emmanuel who was a Hutu. And he was in a community meeting where two community leaders were shot for resisting their participation in the genocide. And what he says in this interview is, so fear was instilled in the rest of us and it made us stupid. This fear changed us and we went out to kill people. And so this is blocks the shared pain. And then finally, the one that gives us all the creeps, and that's intelligent enemy mode. And in intelligent enemy mode, this is what predators use to hunt. They intelligently use the weakness and pain of others to take full advantage in order to win. And inevitably, we look back at it and say, how could they possibly have done that? Well, the way they do it is two ways. One is they don't attach personally. So these are not people I care about, and therefore I'm not going to share their pain. I'll observe their pain, I'll take advantage of their pain, I'll know all about their pain, but it won't touch me. And with that knowledge, I'm going to win by hurting you. And this is the kind of things, these are the ones that are the leaders. They're intelligently using all of the factors we've talked about before. They may not understand brain science, but they use those to produce simple and stupid as well as intelligent enemy mode in others. And later we can talk about what contributes to that and how to get out of it. But that's kind of the brain side of it. These things happen before we start thinking about it, and they explain the reactions that even the people sitting there wondering, why am I not doing something about it? This is what's ticking in their brain underneath it all.
Thank you very much, Dr. Wilder. That was very fascinating. I have obviously a number of follow-up questions from that presentation. I do believe that Karen has some slides that she'd like to share with us tonight as part of her opening dialogue. Karen?
All right, can you see that?
Yes, we can.
Wonderful. So yes, I am very grateful that, and I'm looking at it now, trying to move it. There you go. My father did survive the Holocaust. I'm very grateful he did. And he said a lot of things about it. In fact, I was the closest person to him that he shared to all this information. And one of the quotes that I got from him when I was very young was, I remember the strength and the determination and the kindness of the people who did not give in to the power of Nazi intimidation. And growing up as a child of a Holocaust survivor, that gave me hope that there were people who weren't all Nazis that were in fact involved. So bear with me as I share with you a little bit too. We know hatred is taught. No one is born hating. We're very excited that we have a bill that turned to law this summer from in Colorado that now is going to mandate education for Holocaust and genocide awareness, which is just phenomenal. But I like to say that education arrests culpability and attributability, I always say that hard, in continuing the ideology taught that leads to genocide. So we need to take responsibility, right? It's not anyone else's fault when something happens to a society. Maslow obviously is a very old hierarchy of needs pyramid, but we've all seen this. This is not new to any of us, but notice the second and the third, safety needs and then belonging needs. Those are way important in comparison to all other values or all other wants. Obviously, it's not the top of this pyramid, but it's also 2 out of the 5. So when we have herd mentality, we have people that are actually following the herd because they like to belong and they feel safe when they're in a group. And the one who might raise their hand or turn the other way is seen as crazy. So we know this about conformity. People do conform to whatever the group is doing, but people tend to think more clearly and use moral judgment using right from wrong thinking when they are alone more. So that sets us up for some failure, doesn't it? The ADL's Pyramid of Hate is really well written, and I really appreciate all the words that are on here and all the explanations of how we get to genocide from just being biased. But we've already experienced 3 and 4 of these. I mean, it's scary. We really are in a very scary time. But I'd like to point out not this one, but this one. This is that proverbial iceberg where we only are knowledgeable of what's sticking out of the water, which is just the tip of the iceberg, when all the rest of it down below is really how the iceberg is being held up. So what we really should know is down below. What some of us might know is just at the water, and what you do know is at the top. Genocide is wrong. But if we don't know how we get here, like Barbara said, it's a short walk. We need to work on that. So when my father moved in with my family, my daughter was just 5. And shortly thereafter, she noticed he had a number on his arm that did not have enough numbers to be a telephone number. So she asked him, and there began her beginning learning of humankind. So he did tell her age appropriately as a 5-year-old what happened to him, what happened to his family, our family, and why she didn't have any great-grandparents or aunts or uncles or cousins. And it was very emotional, but it changed my daughter and certainly my son as well, and made them think bigger at a younger age. My daughter often says we need the development of values and compassion to be a stand-upster. It comes with understanding our shared history. Very similar to what you just said, Jim, but you did it more eloquently. I really liked this quote from Kurt Vonnegut, where 10% of any population is cruel, 10% is merciful, and the remaining 80% could be moved in either direction. So I like to throw in that, friends of Voltaire were quoted to say, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," which is basically First Amendment, right? Freedom of speech, which I've been known to question recently. And the reason why is because I've learned Germany has a constitutional amendment that they have added since their World War II Holocaust experience. And they add disseminating untrue facts or abusive criticism, defined as statements that are not primarily made to debate a topic, but rather to defame a person, fall outside of the scope of the protection of that said freedom of speech amendment. It also says false information is not an object worthy of protection from the viewpoint of freedom of opinion. And then my favorite, which is why it's in red, the dissemination of ideas that violate human dignity are not protected at all for freedom of speech. I would like to see our freedom of speech First Amendment amended to include, if what you're saying violates human dignity, it will not be allowed. In other words, hate speech is no longer allowed. I say we are socially obligated to show moral leadership and integrity when given the opportunity to stop discrimination from happening right in front of you. It's our national value to be inclusive. That's what we say we are. We say we are America. We incorporate everyone. We're the melting pot. We say that. That says we value inclusivity. But if you see it, you own it. If you see something terrible happening and you do something about it or you don't do something about it, it is in you already. And if it's trauma because you didn't help, you own the trauma. It filters through to you as well. So we are responsible and we have culpability when we do nothing. And there are laws right now. In fact, you may not know this, but 28 countries have laws that promote the bystander taking action and actually punish the bystander who chooses not to take action. And I'll get into that a little bit later. I loved watching Scotty McCreery during the American Idol 2011 show. And I was grateful I was watching with my children. I don't normally do that, but it was such a great show. And this was that time in the show where they were grouping into different groups, trying to work together and then performing in front of the judges. And there was this young man who had been basically isolated. They pushed him out. It was very non-obvious why, but he was obviously not fitting in. He was socially a little awkward. And Scotty felt really badly about it. And he kept watching this kid get pushed from one group to the other. And here he was on stage, and he stopped the performance and said, wait a minute, walked half off stage, waved to this young man and said, come on, you're in our group now. And he apologized to the judges and said, I should have done this earlier. I was trying to think of what was best for me and our group, but then I just can't go forward without allowing this young man to have the same opportunity I'm having. So he basically on national television showed what it takes to be a stand-upster and how uncomfortable it was. So that's called disrupted empathy. And that's really, really cool that we have a word for it. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people that do it. It's uncomfortable. We know What Would You Do, the TV show John has had on for years. Everyone who watches it always says, oh, I could never do that. Or they say, I should have done that. But it's not a norm. And I'm wanting it to be a norm. That's what I'm promoting, that we do figure out that we are in fact dealing with a brain that's a reptilian brain, as Jim shared. It's very old and we need to grow. We need to evolve a little bit more. We know that nope, I'm not going to get that. Anatomy of an ally, has many sides. We can speak against injustice. We can sniff out implicit bias. We can identify privilege. We can listen to the people of color's experience, and we can have a heart to cultivate that empathy for anyone who's oppressed. We must also have hands that take action. So that duty to assist is the name of that law I was mentioning before. And Utah is struggling with it right now. It was put in a bill in 2018, and they're still trying to get it to pass. But in the meantime, what I really love about them in Utah in regards to their politics is they actually currently just said vanity license plates are not allowed to actually purchase when a group is being denied or disparaged on race, color, national origin, religion, age, gender, identity, or sexual orientation, citizenship status, physical or mental disability, or sex. So if any of those things are being referenced in your vanity plate, you will be denied. Again, free speech, we're kind of shutting that down a little because we're giving it a little bit more of a moral tone, which I appreciate. I'm very excited that 28 countries have led the way for duty to assist. There's a lot of evidence that it works in all those countries that we in America need to learn from. 6 states in America currently have it. The duty to assist requires that if you are a bystander and you are witness to a crime where another person is going to be harmed and you do nothing, you will in fact have a 5th degree felony misdemeanor given to you. So that's a pretty big, steep thing, right? You get big time trouble for doing nothing. But the reason is that if you could have stopped that woman from being raped, if you had just called the authorities, if you could have stopped someone from dying from a alcohol overdose while you're at a party and you chose to walk over the body and keep going and didn't say anything, you're culpable. That's what we're basically saying. You're culpable when you have the choice. Now, the duty to assist rules across the countries as well as in our 6 states say that if calling 911 will harm you or get you in trouble, you are not held responsible. But otherwise you are. And I find that fascinating. It reminds me of Jodie Foster's movie, The Accused, which was a while back. And she is unfortunately attacked and accosted, and there are people cheering the people on who were doing the terrible things. And she gets very upset when the person who actually did the deed against her got a very light sentence. She wanted to hold accountable the cheerleaders, and she did. And she was successful. It's a very powerful movie. And I think we all need to pay heed to that. I ask every audience I speak to if I can count on them to grow morally, because I think we've been bankrupt morally recently, and we need to really invest again. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Karen. It was a very interesting presentation. And I think that those of you guys who are tuning in with us can see the depth and breadth of the experience that we have on our panel tonight. There have been some very interesting things said. One of the points you made in your opening remarks, Barbara, was we have to hold them accountable. We have to hold them accountable, which was kind of like a prevailing theme throughout all three of your remarks. But what do you mean? Can you drill down on that? We have to hold them accountable.
I'm going to start way back to how do we learn to stand up, speak out, and step in? And we as adults have to walk the talk and talk the walk if we expect our children to do likewise. When that high status social bully says to all the other girls in grade 8, I don't like the new girl. You want to be in my group? Don't eat lunch with her. I want your daughter to be the one to go and sit next to the new girl. Now, she will do that at cost. She's not going to get scratches and stickers and stars, catch them being good awards, or lunch with the principal. What she'll probably get is, oh, Miss Goody Two Shoes, or you're next. Or your son in grade 9 in the locker room, when his classmates say, look at that kid over there, different skin color, religion, gender, physical or mental ability, the big 5 for hate crimes. What makes a hate crime different than any other crime? It's criminal bullying. Let's go mess him up. I want your son to be the one to say no. When the burden is heavy, when his friends say, what are you, chicken? What do you just like him? But how do they get that? And what I ask parents to look at, and other adults in contact with kids, is how do you treat hired help? How do you move through the grocery store when there's somebody in front of you moving a lot slower than you'd like them to? How do you treat the new neighbor who looks different, whose skin color is different, whose language is different as their first language, who has different foods or different ways to dress? Your children are watching. And very personal, how do you treat the bigoted relative at your family gathering? And now we all have bigoted relatives somewhere on the family tree. Some just aren't on the branches yet. They're right there at the dinner table, spewing bigoted comments, thinly disguised as jokes. Can your children see you say, I'm bothered by that, or that was racist, or that was sexist, when all the other relatives roll their eyes and say, what, can't you take a joke? Not that kind. And you know you've had an impact when you walk back in the dining room and everybody shuts up. But you've had an impact. A bigger impact is when your mother, who is very upset with you, says, did you have to spoil the dinner? It's your uncle, he's old. Now, old, and I'm 73, is never an excuse for bigotry and intolerance. Can your children observe you being uncomfortable in that situation, yet still willing to stand up, speak out, and step in and say, Mom, I don't want my children to ever think it's okay to make those comments, no matter how old you are or in what situation you're in. When you do that, the chances of your daughter sitting next to the new girl, the chances of your son stepping in has been radically increased. And it's very much what Jim was talking about in terms of that sense of self connected to others, that we are interdependent, interrelated, interconnected. Bullying and genocide and any crimes against humanity and hate crimes all have as their root contempt for another human being. And once I have contempt for you, I can do anything to you and not feel, as Jim talked about, the shame or compassion. I can take a Matthew Shepard, beat him up, tie him to a fence post, lead him to die in Laramie, Wyoming. And when those 2 young boys were caught, they said, yeah, but he was gay. James Byrd, Jasper, Texas, drug on the back of a pickup until he was dead. And when those 3 young boys were arrested, they said, yeah, but he was Black. You see, we can't have that kind of disconnect. We have to start very young, raising children through our own actions and our talking with them and their experiences to see the other as connected to them. They are unique, you're unique. I tell students, you don't have to like every kid in this class, but you must honor their humanity. You must treat them with dignity and regard. So it starts in our homes, our schools, and our communities, being willing to stand up and speak out. We're now seeing, Alfonso, people who are willing to speak out, who are realizing that they will be slapped down, they will be tweeted about, they will be ripped apart, they will have people standing in their yards armed, but they're willing to do the right thing at cost. I'm trying to think of his name. He said, there are no innocent bystanders. What were they doing there in the first place? And what they were doing was all those things you mentioned right at the beginning. They were henchmen, active supporters, passive supporters, disengaged onlookers. There were also those who were afraid to step in, but they're still part of the problem. And I like to start from age 5, teaching young people about that trap of comradeship that Sebastian Haffner talked about in Defying Hitler, that you can get locked in that trap and go along mindlessly with a leader who wants to harm others, or you can step out of that. We do have the ability. We've seen both. We've seen in genocides. I work in Rwanda with orphans from the '94 genocide, and we took in Bosnian refugees, Serb, Muslim, and Croat. Our first Thanksgiving was most interesting. But I've also met people who had stood up and stepped in for them, got them food, rescued them in a banana field, saved them from the machetes. And the youngest ones I met were now grown when I met them, but they were 8 and 6 when they rescued the young boy's classmate. It wasn't even a good friend. And I said, why would you do that? He said, because he's my classmate. He was humanly connected to him. And I think that's what we have to constantly nurture, is that human connectedness, that we are all unique and we have a common humanity.
Thank you very much. I think that was very thorough. Thank you so much for that, Barbara. You mentioned cost, and so did Dr. Wilder. I mean, this whole thing about a cost benefit, right? There's some kind of cost benefit analysis, and we're kind of thinking, well, if I do this, what's in it for me, right? I mean, it sounds a little bit, sounds a little bit silly to say what's in it for me, but what we're seeing today, and I guess this is to Dr. Wilder, we see reasonable, intelligent, rational people who have the ability to think critically, nevertheless, go along with whatever program. So let's say Mr. Trump's program. Obviously, the election is over, but these reasonable, intelligent people continue to follow, as Barbara said, blindly. Can you help us understand that?
Well, I'll give it a little shot here. The contributors to enemy mode don't actually line up very much along the side of intelligence. I have worked in special needs units, and I've found a degree of camaraderie, of human caring for other people, and people we would not really give Nobel Prizes to, but they seem to understand the human connection with others in ways that seems to get lost sometimes among the bright and intellectual people. But there's really, well, let me just run through 8 factors that contribute to us dropping into enemy mode with other people. Maybe that will help us. The first and most common is fatigue. We actually don't get enough rest, and we end up, when we're tired, not caring nearly as much as we should have. That's a huge part of Western civilization. Maybe it was brought on by electric lights and a few things like that. I don't know, but we don't rest adequately, and we don't rest with other people. There's a lack of human relational capital. The average person now has very, very few friends. For as many people as they have internet connection with, they don't share deeply with anybody, in a sense that, you know, we're really sharing the parts that come to where we hurt together. Remember, hurting together is the thing that brings us over the edge. Especially when they were studying the people who torture and kill, they found that they live in an as if world, and they live there as if people. They're not really connected. The human brain actually has something that I don't think any other brain on Earth has, and that's a very well developed as if circuit that we use to solve problems. But as early as 18 months of age, children begin to find out that if I act as if I was somebody that different than who I am, I'll get better results. So when you're in an as if world with an as if thinking and an as if person, you've already disconnected yourself from other people. That's why psychiatrists ended up being the initial best killers for the Nazis, because they had developed a very strong as if person. I act as if I care about you, but in actual fact, there's no human connection with you at all. And then not seeing another person as my people. And for this, I say, you know, you want to be somebody's people, share food with them. I remember one inner city community had a more wealthy group that would come and help them occasionally when they needed to clean up the facilities, which is about every 6 months. And eventually, the leaders that came in to help the inner city asked the question, well, how is it that your facilities get dirty so regularly? And they said, well, you know, we have a lot of people that come here and they help us, but you're the only ones that actually eat with us. So we let our place get a mess so you'll come in here and eat with us. We don't really care whether you clean it up or not at all. But another factor is when my people hate your people, like with the chimps. So what defines us as people is who we hate. And that's what actually is growing like a weed all around the country right now, where we have got so few real connections that the easiest, cheapest way to connect with other people is then who we're against. So how many people do you know who simultaneously would share the Black Lives Matter people pain and a Trump supporter pain? Because they're all, you know, pretty upset at the moment. But the kind of people that would connect to both sides are the kinds of people that said, no, we can't really afford to be antis. We have to be people who connect with other people. And you'll be disliked on both sides, by the way. I can remember being in the middle of a fight to break it up and getting beat up by both parties. One of them was my brother, but I digress. And then we're actually, you know, most of the talk radio that is really getting a lot of traction right now is anti-groups. So we're agreeing with others who we want to be against. Then if you add any kind of greed or envy, and by the way, when I studied children who kill, we find that they tend to kill the people that have the thing they wanted, not the people that made them mad. And what most of them, you know, if you look at these shooters that go into schools, they shoot the kids that have friends because they don't have any. So it's this lack of social capital, lack of closeness that releases your brain to go, well, I don't really care what happens to you at all right now. And so the last thing is that power gets brought into this a lot. So giving power always creates sociopathic behavior if we look at the studies about it. And what sociopathic behavior means is I win if you lose. And I don't think we have to look very far beyond our own political system to realize the best interests of people are constantly being put second at making sure the other side loses. Well, this kind of power struggle makes people, again, make anti-groups. withholding power also creates hate and cold anger. So neither giving power nor withholding it are going to be safe solutions. And adolescents in particular are very prone to form an anti-identity when they have no one to bring them into a protective identity. So what both Barbara and Karen are saying is we have to actively create a protective identity. Say we are protective kinds of people. You want to grow up as a part of this society, we learn to protect other people, even at a cost to ourselves. And when we all do it together, the cost to ourselves is a whole lot less. And if not, we stop being the kinds of people we are. And how you teach that is missing when people are just very intelligently figuring out, how do I win? And this is what we have with the very intelligent people you're talking about. They're intelligently looking for a way to win, which is basically intelligent enemy mode, as opposed to learning how to be the kind of people we would be glad to be when we look back on our lives.
Thank you, Dr. Wilder. That makes a lot of sense. Karen, you mentioned the duty to assist.
Yes.
And what happens when you want to help, but you fear physical retribution, right? And I think you said that if in fact that's the case, then you cannot be held accountable. So I'm trying to navigate that, right? So can you help us a little bit?
Sure. So I'm sure everyone knows about the Good Samaritan Act, right? That's pretty much nationwide in our country, where you won't be held accountable if someone falls in front of you and has a heart attack and you attempt CPR because you took a class once. But you didn't do it quite right, and they did or they didn't die. It doesn't matter what happens. You're not going to be held accountable. If you did not have an actual class for CPR and you tried to give it because you watched TV, then you could be held accountable. So there are some rules that are already in place that are similar to that. And Alfonso, I'd like to share also that when you think about this social construct of who is going to be getting a consequence for their inaction, well, we have to be the ones that provide that social consciousness and that whole consequence ideal. Like if I had somebody in my home, which I have had, who then said something like, don't be a Jew about it, pass the beans. And I stop everything and everyone stops talking. And the person who's the guest in my home says, what did I say? And what they meant was they were using a disparaging word, right? A discriminatory word, one that they probably didn't quite understand how I would feel, but they knew I was Jewish. They knew my family was Jewish. And as soon as I brought it to their attention, they were completely apologetic. But what has to happen one step further, as Barbara was saying, when you have a family member who is making those bad jokes and being racist, we need to say you're no longer welcome here when you use that language. We need to be willing to make the societal decision that it is a society that I have in my area, that I'm not willing to have you participate in my village, if you will, when you're behaving that way. So ultimately, what happens though is that those people don't necessarily leave with a new train of thought. They leave with a consequence they learned, and it's a natural consequence, and they won't do that again if they come to my house again, but they don't change their racist beliefs. So we have some work to do in that arena. Like Barbara said, as children are young, they need to have all this education. I'd like to bring up another story. A girlfriend of mine called me on her way home after a Bible study, which she had just joined, and she was with a number of women. And at some point in the middle of this Bible study, one woman said, "Those Jews," in a very negative way. And my girlfriend looked around to see what was happening, and she noticed right away 4 or 5 women said, "Yeah." Right away, talk about conformity. So my girlfriend, and I am proud to call her my girlfriend, stood right up and said, this is not acceptable for a Christian organization. I do not agree with calling Jews bad people and then having you gang up on this idea that the Jews are bad at a Bible study. And the leader was very upset and said, please don't leave. You know, she didn't mean it, all this stuff, even though we all knew she did. And what I was really impressed with my girlfriend doing is she said out loud in front of everyone that this is not okay. She didn't just get up and leave and not show up again. She gave a societal consequence for that behavior. Now, did that change those ladies' opinions of Jews? No, but we need to build up our societal consequence bank. We don't have enough of them. We've had so many things happen out in the open that have gone unpunished, that deserve to be punished. And we've been retrained in the last 4 years. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And I agree with everyone on the panel, of course. I think we have to be conscious of how we are going to get this work done, because who is going to take their feelings out of the equation and, Alfonso, help that person who's currently being bullied around the corner if they aren't feeling connected to the human race? It can't just be only if I knew the girl around the corner would I interfere. It's got to be we're attacking the wrong as a unified people. That's what we need to get to.
Thank you very much, Ken. That was terrific. This is good. This is good stuff. I'm truly learning a lot. Well, first of all, I'd like to invite those who are tuning in with us to pose questions. You can type your questions into the chat. We'd be more than happy to pose those to our panelists. I want to ask, and I'll just kind of throw this out to everybody. What happens on the other side? So let's say, for example, you have the henchman and you have the witness and you have the other, and you remove the bully, right? So now the bully is gone. What happens to the instigator and the perpetrator and the rest, right? What happens on the other side of that? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes. And I think one of the things we need to recognize is, as Sebastian Happner said in Defying Hitler, that group that you mentioned, those not so innocent bystanders, are locked in a trap of comradeship with the perpetrator. Now, the perpetrators play 3 roles. They can be the instigator, they can be the person who plans it, and they can be the one who actually carries it out, or they can be all 3 together. The interesting thing is when they are removed, they are gone, the other group has to realign, and that's where the witness resistors and defenders can step in. And that's why I'm so heartened that we're talking about coming together. It's going to be a long haul. I mean, there are 3 virulent agents ripping apart the fabric of our humanity right now. 3 H's: hating one another with utter contempt, hoarding, that sense of me, mine, and more instead of us, ours, and enough, and harming through lying and cheating and stealing. So what's wrong with lying and cheating and stealing? First of it all, it destroys you as a unique individual. It destroys your relationship with the thou, and then in turn destroys community. So what would be the antidotes to that? And there are 3: care deeply, share generously, and help willingly. As Jim talked about, sharing food and caring deeply. Now, caring deeply doesn't mean you always like the person, but caring deeply is that must to relieve somebody else's suffering and wishing them well, which, by the way, is the antithesis of mean and cruel. You cannot be mean and cruel and wish to relieve somebody else's suffering and wish them well. It doesn't work together. So the more we can do that, typically you're going to see, with the exception of the first 3 on that bully circle, you will see people feeling awful that they didn't do something, especially that one who was the wannabe witness, who knew it was the right thing to do, but they were afraid they'd be next, afraid they wouldn't do it right, and the like. So if we help them care more deeply about one another, share generously, and this is where the eating together can be so healing, to invite disparate groups to come together to eat, to break bread together, so to speak. care deeply, share generously, and the last one is so critical. James Natchway, the war photographer, famous war photographer, said, "Do good because good is good to do." So to help willingly, that when we do good, I have worked with kids who failed in their attempt to suicide after being horribly targeted by others. And their parents will say to me, I got him in a good school. I got him therapy. What more can I do? And I said, well, what's he doing? Oh, no, but he was the one targeted. I said, precisely. What's he doing to heal himself? And the best way we can heal one another is to get out of ourselves and do good for others, to step out in some way to do good for others. So if we can help our young people do those three things on a regular basis, it will work against hating and hoarding and harming. But they actually have to be actively involved. We can't just talk the talk. We have to get them involved. I remember once a priest called us, and he had always told us he's going to help us all practice charity. And he called me and he said, Barb, I know you have 3 kids, and a Hmong family just moved in as refugees, and those 3 kids are just younger than yours. I told them you would be over with food, clothing, and toys. So I said to my kids, gather up your toys. And I thought I had some pretty generous kids, right? Wrong. Especially our youngest, he was so stingy. But once we got over there, and the toys he was willing to part with, which weren't his best toys, this little boy was so happy to receive it that when we got in the car, he said, Mommy, can I go home and get some more toys? And what struck me was, I can talk the talk all I want, but until our children are actively doing that, it's not going to be that part of the brain that Dr. Wilder was talking about, where they feel a human connection. Joey felt a human connection to that other. And he had gotten in trouble once and went along with a group of kids calling a young girl fat. And so the teacher said, well, I know they didn't mean it. Well, I thought, I don't care whether he meant it or not. What he did was cruel. And so I told him we were having the little girl over. He said, oh, please don't do this. Please don't do this. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. And we invited the little girl and her mom over. And she saw his turtle and she said, oh, I love turtles and I love parakeets. And we have one of those. And he said, Mommy, can she watch those while we're on holiday? Because we were struggling with what we're going to do with a turtle and a parakeet on holiday. But it was getting them together and realizing that they are connected to one another, that what you did was ugly. And I'd never demand an apology. What I do say is you've got to own and fix what you did. Figure out how you're going to keep it from happening again. And don't you tell me you're not going to do that again. I want you to tell me what you will do. And that's where your wisdom as adults come in, to show them some things they can do. And the third is to heal with that person you've harmed. That's what the gachachas in Rwanda were about. But we also recognize that some people have been so horribly hurt that they do not want to see the other person who macheted their families to death. Some are willing after years of healing to be willing to do that. But one woman wouldn't, Clarissa. And so Paul Kagame, the president of Rwanda, said, well, what would you say to people who refuse to meet with the people who slaughtered their family? And I said, what I said to Clarissa is don't lose your caring self. That if you've done that, the genocidaires have won. So just extend yourself to others in a caring, loving way. That you will not want to be in the same community as the person who macheted your family to death is okay. But don't let it eat at you, that whole sense of revenge. And so it's not an easy, simple, it is pretty simple, but it's not easy to do. And it takes one-on-one and collectively as a community say, we have got to come together to care more deeply, share more generously, and help more willingly.
Excellent. Thank you, Barbara. I want to pose that same question
I was going to say
to the other panelists. Let me just say, what happens, and you guys know what I'm getting at when I say when the bully is removed.
Yep.
So what's going to happen when Mr. Trump is gone?
We have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work.
I mean, as it relates to the behavior of those who follow him. First on the the side of those elected officials, and on the side of those who, and I don't want to say this wrong, but the stupid enemy, right, that Jim mentioned. What happens when he is removed and he's gone?
Well,
Psychologically.
I believe in order to uphold the principles of a democracy, which is what we're talking about in these 5 months, we must recognize the complexity of the choices made by these people and how these individuals further define the roles that they were in and what those responsibilities then become of the people who let that continue to happen, the consequences of their actions and inactions, those that knew or disagreed with what was happening, but stayed silent because they didn't want to be the next one to be fired. Those are the people I think 5 years from now, we're going to hear the psychologists, psychiatrists, sociologists, and philosophers talk badly about, because you're right. Removing the bully doesn't remove the mistakes that were made, because we've literally changed the fabric of how we believe our democracy is working. And right now there's so much fear and fear-mongering out there that people are afraid of things that they ought not to be afraid of. We always talk about how you have to be a better listener when you disagree politically. You don't want to alienate your friends just because you have a different political philosophy of how to get something done. I don't think anyone says that they didn't want the bridges and the roads to be fixed, and yet you can disagree on where the money will come from, but the roads and the bridges need to be fixed. So how do we fix educating our children from a young age? And how do we mandate, and I use that word on purpose, what the rules will be? For example, we know cyberbullying is a very, very bad thing. But it's not about the person who sent out the bad email. It's about the people who read the email and then forwarded it. The forwardingers, the people who forwarded were the active supporters. And they don't think they did it because they just forwarded someone else's words, someone else's email. But they need to be educated on what their part was, what their action was, and subsequently what their consequence will be. And until we label those and name those and explain that and add it to our laws, we're not going to see very much change. And that's, I think, one of the worst things that has happened with the last 4 years. We've witnessed how hate speech has grown, and we've had a lot more conformity, because that's what human beings still do. They conform. And when they don't have a group, they find some place or some way to get meaning in their life. And I like to say that when the bully is still actively bullying, and you think, if I step in and I try to be a stand-upster right now, the bully will be not hurt forever, not removed from school or work, but I'll be seeing him again in a week. Then I'm next. How do I handle that? And my answer to that is simple. I know it sounds simple, or not simple, but it's simple for me. Why are you alive? Who put you here? What are your values? Are you willing to live your life looking the other way and not helping when you could have helped and saved a life? And when I say saved a life, it doesn't have to be a death. It could be just someone's experience, because that person having that terrible experience that you witnessed and did nothing scars you too. And that trauma does filter through to everyone. So we have to be able to say, the old books that we all used to read, that our teenagers are not reading right now in general, talked about character. They talked about values. They talked about what kind of person are you? Who are you? You don't just say, I'm Karen Brass. I don't just say, I'm the mother of my family. I don't say, I'm just the person who lives at this address, or just a member of this neighborhood. I say, I'm a part of the human race. I mean, I jump all the way out. And we need to continue to teach that lesson, or we're going to continue to see these bad things happen. And yeah, if the bully comes after you, you get to still say, I'm proud of the way I behaved anyway. And hopefully there will be laws in place and police getting trained and educated on how to handle these situations, so that we don't have to worry about that retaliation. Because until we get our police forces in a position to understand their part and get our community leaders and our religious leaders involved, we aren't going to see a change.
Perfect. Thanks, Karen.
Let
Jim,
me
would you
jump in? Yes.
Yeah, please, by all means.
Yeah. I'd like to combine something that Barbara said with something that Karen was talking about there. But first point out that very often what happens when the bully is removed is that those that were somehow complicit become entrenched in how are we going to win and how are we going to avoid. So they see the other side as the ones that are going to make them lose. That's why they were fighting to begin with. So that entrenchment on the other side is sure to follow up. And while there needs to be social consequences, one of the things that is particularly ineffective is giving consequences to people who are in enemy mode. It just makes them madder.
Yeah.
So I like what Barbara was saying about what kind of example do we provide for others. And from a brain perspective, if we can't get ourselves out of enemy mode, we're not going to do any good trying to get someone else out of it. The question is, have our children, have our neighbors, have other people seen us get ourselves out of enemy mode? Now, you would think the solution is not to get into enemy mode, but the human brain is just way too prone to go into enemy mode. You know, my wife can do it to me with a comment. My kids can do it to me with my grandkids can say, you know, and my boss can do it to me. I mean, there's so many ways I can get into enemy mode. And the question is, do I know how to get myself out? Because if I can demonstrate that to you, it produces a hope for others. And so this bit of being globally concerned but acting locally, I'd just like to make a few suggestions about how we could do that. And then the first is, again, very close to what Barbara was suggesting, and that is you have to build a pattern of joyful relationships so you have something to come back to. If you've never tasted joyful relationships or they're scarce in your life, oh, what the heck? I don't gain anything by coming out of enemy mode. But enemy mode is miserable. It's just miserable. And if I've got relationships to go back to, it really helps a whole lot. There's a book coming out in January called The Joy Switch, which I would recommend to everybody. And it's basically, how do you get yourself out of enemy mode? And joy to the brain means we're glad to be together. So right enemy mode means we're not glad to be together. I don't feel like you're on my side. And I've stopped being curious about you. I've stopped being interested in you. I'm just trying to stop you somehow or another. When you stop talking, I'll have something to say or however it is. But that's the very simple thing. How do we get out of that? And the Joy Switch book, I think I'd recommend to everybody is, let's get good at this, getting back to building joyful relationships with others. Time Magazine, the special edition that just came out, The Power of Joy. Again, suggesting that what's happening in our environment right now is we've become a highly low joy country. If you look at places in the world where things are most miserable, they're low joy environments. People are just not glad to be together. So we can do some very specific things. We can also learn the signs of enemy mode. I've actually given the people around me permission to tell me when I'm in enemy mode. So, you know, like, I think you're kind of in enemy mode, Jim. No, well, not either. Okay. And, you know, when I'm by myself and quiet, I can identify that a little bit better. So one of the things we have to learn is practice some ways to chill when our feelings get too intense. Remember when the feeling got too intense in the brain, it cramps up and then we no longer feel other people's pain. So when I feel I'm not feeling your pain, what I usually think is you have it coming. So I've labeled that thought, you know, you deserve this, you have it coming. When I see that thought run through my head, because it comes through real bright, you know, like, you deserve that. If you hadn't gotten in front of my car, I wouldn't have run you over. Kind of a, you know, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's that kind of thing. He says, my mind is in enemy mode. I no longer care about what's happening to you. Now, if you really want to get good at it, and we found in domestic violence situations when we're trying to turn those around, the hardest pain to share is the pain I caused. So if we want to actually get the best we can, what we want to do is share the pain that we caused. And I would recommend a story from this book right here about trauma comes through, where Mr. Zauer let his rage and anger and all those sorts of things that we know where it comes from. It was coming out on the dog and his family. And Karen approached him, and basically what happens, he goes to his room, he thinks about it a little bit, but he comes out and shares the pain he caused. I shouldn't have done this to you. And from that day on, regardless of all the trauma he carried around, it never came out again. This is just a very powerful example, and it's worth reading from this book along with other things. But sharing that pain we caused is very, very important. Then I think we should practice and define what my people do and say when we see predators. We're hearing all of that from both of the other panelists. We have to have a known response. My people don't do this. We don't let it go. Here's actually what I would say. And so often people say, well, I was there, I couldn't think of what to say or do. I was just kind of lost. We can rehearse these things ahead of time. We can practice them in little ways. What do I say when I let you yell at your sister or brother or something like that? And the things that are in our life, we practice what our group doesn't say. I would also suggest joining a group that's defined by helping and protecting others. We're protectors, and you're going to have to practice that. Join a group. Don't get an anti-group. Get a group that is on behalf of somebody else. And let it hurt you a little bit. Let it cost you something. Let it say it's okay to feel a little bit distressed in order to get this done. And then finally, when we're able to do it again, share your meals at home. There's nothing like sharing your food with others that says to the chimp part of our brain, we eat together, we share meals. I really can't let anything bad happen to you. That's why who you eat with at school and who you invite home and all these things matter so much. So, by the way, feeding other people doesn't do it. We feed pets, we feed animals, we feed cows, we feed people in prison. No, it's sharing my food. That's the difference. It's you're one of my people. I share what I eat with you. And one of the difficult things about religions is that there's food rules for Jews and Muslims and Christians and Buddhists. And so we get nervous about sharing food with each other. But these things are worth overcoming. I'm not saying we can respect each other and still have a lot of food to share. And until we do that, we do not become one kind of people. And then when you're my people, I got to do something. I'm sharing your pain. And when I go into enemy mode, I know how to get myself out of it. Then I have something to offer you. I can say to you, well, you know what, have you ever considered enemy mode, and do you want to come out of it? Because we're just not the kind of people that want to live that way. It feels like hell.
Thank you, Dr. Wilder. Listen, we've got time for one more question, and I'd like to pose this from one of our viewers. And it's much in line with what we talked about earlier. I think it was Linda, about the courses that are going to be compulsory in schools. And the question is, how do we create transformative change of a bully's or racist thinking and actions? And where my mind went when I saw the question was, we grow them up the right way. And so that if we have mandatory courses in school, it represents an opportunity for us to implement the change that we have so eloquently discussed this evening. So again, how do we create that transformative change in the bullies or the racist thinking and actions?
Well, I would say we don't. We don't do it. Individually, our relationship with them can help, but also holding them accountable. So often when I'm doing bullying workshops, they say, yeah, but we have all these positive behavioral interventions for them. I said, well, that's good, but how about we start with holding them accountable for what they did? And that's the 3 R's of restorative justice: restitution, own and fix to the best of your ability what you've done. Now, in a genocide, in a crime against humanity, in a hate crime, in hateful rhetoric, that's hard to get those words back because you can't. But you can own that you said them. And you do it without a smirk on your face, that you own it. Fix it. Were you online and spread an ugly rumor? Can you go back in online and say, I spread an ugly rumor? And you don't repeat the rumor, but I spread this ugly rumor. If you received it, please delete it. What I did was wrong. If you sent it on, please send this on. Now that takes a humble person to do it. I'm not out to humiliate people who have made a racist comment, sexist comment, or been mean and cruel. My job is to humble them. So restitution, resolution, reconciliation at the behest of the person who's been targeted when they feel strong enough to then sit down with them. And what you say is, this is what I did. Often that's Archbishop Desmond Tutu found that out in the restorative practices in South Africa, is even just hearing them say it and mean the hurt, that they know they hurt someone. Restitution. And so you sit down and you say, I did these things. This is how I'm going to keep it from happening again. And I would love for you to join us online, and I won't lock you out, I promise. I would love you to join us at the lunch table, and won't ostracize you like I did or throw food at your table. But the kid who's been targeted has full right to say, gee, I'd love to join you. But they also have the right to say what Steve Seskin said so beautifully in the song he and Alan Shamlin wrote and Peter, Paul, and Mary made famous, don't laugh at me. Don't call me names. Don't take your pleasure from my pain. You see, contempt for another human being is getting pleasure from their pain. And so if the targeted person says, you know, I don't want to have lunch with you, and it's like an affront to the other person, but no, what you've done is you've humbled the person who was mean and cruel, then you empowered the one who was harmed. Now, after that, you can use all those positive behavioral interventions, including why is that a racist statement? And giving them giving them the opportunity to practice friendship skills, as Jim Wilder talked about, how important it is that we have good friends. Monitoring their online and offline interactions, because that might be contributing to their hateful rhetoric or their hateful actions. Giving them the opportunity to get engaged in constructive activities. Instead of cruising the hallways to find somebody to target, cruise a river, climb a rock wall. And those are those engagement activities where we begin to see one another as helpers to one another. You help me, I'll help you to get this rock climbed. And then we need to help them have an opportunity to do good so that they can begin to heal too. Maybe it's going down and reading to younger kids. Maybe it's going online and developing a program, because these are only roles that people are playing. Some have gotten the roles down so pat they become character actors, like the fawns. Henry Winkler was also a phenomenal Shakespearean actor and writes children's books, but we see him as the fawns. So if a kid or an adult has gotten to this role so much, it's going to be very hard for them to get out. And I must say that there are some people who are so far gone, they need true therapeutic intervention to even begin to heal and to get well. And they're the ones who would least like it. And that's sometimes where family intervention comes in, school intervention, not to allow that kind of thing to happen.
Thank you, Barbara. Looks like we're just about to run out of time, but I do want to give Dr. Wilder and Karen an opportunity to chime in on this question. And how do you feel about the mandatory courses? And do you think that this is a good place to start to make the changes?
I do feel like it's a good
Karen, go
place
ahead.
to start. Yeah, I sorry, Jim. I do feel like it's a good place to start. It's not the only thing. The unintended consequences of teaching character development and character responsibility, when we have students that are given roles to play and they get to understand what each of those roles are, those are the ways they get understanding. Holocaust education and bullying education are two very different things. My father always said he was bullied by professionals But the Holocaust did not happen because of a bully. The Holocaust happened because of all of these people we were discussing this evening. So it would not have happened had there not been bystanders. It would not have happened if we as a human race did not conform. I'm sure you all have seen the picture of everyone in the audience, like thousands of people are all with a Heil Hitler, and there's one man with his arms crossed, just one. So we have a long way to go in developing our ability to think independently. But I think that the education piece has to start somewhere. And ultimately what will happen as the unintended consequence of giving this responsibility over to teachers is that they will start to recognize the nuances in both. The nuances of, oh, this happened in genocide prior to it becoming a genocide. This is what those two groups of people were doing to each other. And I just saw you and Tommy doing it in the hallway. And they start to see it. The teachers are the ones that actually get to see what these students are doing. And every one of us has been in the classroom, and we know those teachers miss a lot. So if the teachers are seeing what they see, we have to remember their 80% is missing. I taught school for a number of years, and I remember how hard it was for me to have to bear witness to the hurt that happened after the event. I never would see the event from this one child. He always did it behind my back in such a perfect way. And so we have to remember, like Barbara said, there are going to be some people that just need some professional help, but I like to focus on the unintended consequences that will happen and will come about because of this education.
So
Thank
what
you,
I would,
Ken.
what I would add is that education is well suited to say, here is what we see as a problem, and here's what steps we have to take to kind of confront that problem as a point of view of society, because that has to be made very, very clear. However, the problem with character is it exists behind a firewall, you might say, in the brain, that is only accessed by the people who really care about me in some way.
Right.
School is not configured in a way that's really going to access that change in firewall access. But after age 12, the firewall is most open to whatever my brain thinks of as my people. And so I think we need to actively cultivate a sense of we're the kind of people who don't let these things happen, that we don't overlook them. We actually address every time I feel like I'm getting into some kind of enemy mode or hateful thing or greedy, or, you know, if we're looking at these things ourselves, we have the right to talk into the lives of the people around us. And in fact, the studies and the work I've done with narcissism is you cannot send a narcissist in for therapy. It only makes them a better narcissist. They figure out more how people feel and how to use that. What's most effective is when the group around them that usually stays silent, what I say is the Pandora problem. That is, if I say anything, it'll only make it worse. That's when you know you're up against this kind of situation. If I say something, it'll only make it worse. That's when the group needs to say, we need to change so that we don't let this happen anymore. It's a change in the group, not in the perpetrator. And the perpetrator will have to quit because they've got no one to lead.
Thank you very much, Jim.
And I'd like to add, if you don't mind,
Yes.
Alfonso.
Yes, please, quickly.
Herbert Kalman, a great scholar in genocide, said that there were 3 conditions. And I think we have to challenge our parenting and the way we teach our kids. And are we reinforcing these 3 conditions? The first is unquestioning obedience to authority. Do we make our kids mind because I said so? Or do we teach them how to think, not just what to think? The second is the routinization of cruelty. And we have seen this over these past 7 or 8 years become a modus operandi, that routinization of cruelty, that it's okay to do these things. And the last is the dehumanization of a targeted group. That's where I have to so much agree with Dr. Wilder that we have got to be willing to step in to break these 3 things up. Because what that is setting the stage for the next step, whether it's a hate crime or hate-fueled violence or crimes against humanity. And I might add, when I was in Rwanda, the wall in Rwanda listed all the genocides in the world based on how many people had died. And the first two we'll never see in this country, but it was North American First Nation peoples and South American First Nation peoples, then the Holocaust, and on downward. So we have to look in our own backyard and recognize when we see the unquestioning obedience to authority, the routinization of cruelty, and the targeting and the dehumanization of another group, that we're in the midst of it and we need to be able to own it, that we've done this, and what can we do to move on? We have to get good at restorative practices.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Barbara. I certainly leave this conversation far more informed than I was before having this conversation. So we'll, at this time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll bring our program to a close. I'd like to thank Barbara and Karen and Jim for just a tremendous presentation tonight. We'd also like to thank the Coalition Against Genocide, Jewish Colorado, and the Denver Urban Spectrum. We would certainly appreciate kind contributions to support our nonprofit organization and to continue to help and make these conversations possible and all the other things that the Coalition does. Please visit our website at www.coagg.org. Again, that's www.coagg.org. This webinar will be made available on our website as well as the Denver Urban Spectrum Now. That's again, Denver Urban Spectrum Now. You have to have that now in there. Okay. It's a monthly hour-long webcast produced and available for viewing on YouTube by the Denver Urban Spectrum. Thank you everyone for joining us for this series of discussions on what if democracy fails, and thank you for participating, the speakers, and to ask them to stay tuned for more information coming up in 2021. All right, so again, ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank you for your time. We want to give one more shout out to our board chair for all the hard work that she's doing to make these things possible for us. And with that, ladies and gentlemen,